So let me start with you, Mr. Dimon. You are the star of the overdraft show. Your bank, JP Morgan, collects more than 7 times as much money in overdraft fees per account.
All right, good morning, everybody. Jeremy from the Independence Channel. Welcome to Real Truth. This morning's episode, we're going to try to make this really quickly. We had the Senate Banking Committee member, Elizabeth Warren, talking with Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, one of the biggest banking criminals in the history of mankind. Now, I'm going to play this clip, but we need to put into context exactly what our system does and how the legislative system, the financialization of our legislation, takes place in order to understand how much this is political theater meant to distract the average unsuspecting and ignorant American into thinking that this Senate Banking Committee is here to help you. Let me give you some advice here. Anybody who is related to any kind of Senate Intelligence Committee, whatever committee, these people are corrupt. They are meant to control the narrative of whatever the topic of conversation is. Furthermore, we have all of these, what you would call, I don't like to use this, so let's actually not use the straw man argument. Let's just say that there are huge misconceptions and things that people don't understand about tax breaks and the difference between bankers making money from tax breaks and bankers making money over the course of time through our legislative body, through the lobbying of our legislative process, the financialization of our legislative body. And when you are in a social democratic society, although we're not in a democracy, and I could prove that, and this actually does kind of prove it. When you have financialization of our legislation and we constantly legislate social programs, what people need to understand is that comes at the cost of the program plus interest plus the regulatory bureaucracy, okay? The bureaucracy is what's going to kill everybody because the bureaucracy ends up going and working for who? Jamie Dimon in a bank or somewhere else where they can be positioned and leveraged to facilitate the mechanisms by which the government has won up on the American taxpayer, and this is simply political theater. All right, and so what you're going to see is a clip of Elizabeth Warren conducting political theater to make you believe that this person is arguing for your rights.
Than your competitors. So, Mr. Dimon, how much did JP Morgan collect in overdraft fees from their consumers in 2020?
Well, I think your numbers are totally inaccurate, but we'll have to sit down privately and go through
These
that.
are public numbers.
And I also want to point out we did not overdraft.
Can you just answer my question?
We
How
did
much
not
did
overdraft
JP
the
Morgan
Fed.
collect?
We did not overdraft at the Fed account. And at any request,
So you never,
said they needed,
I'm sorry,
they needed
Mr.
COVID
Dimon,
relief.
that was,
They got
Mr.
$120
Dimon, that
million
was
for
not the
COVID relief
question.
on request.
You had an automatic protection. So I'm asking, you were recommended, the regulators recommended you offer that same kind of protection to your customers.
And
How much, in fact, did JP Morgan collect in overdraft fees from their customers in 2020? Do you know the number?
All right, now, before we get too crazy on thinking that I'm attacking Elizabeth Warren here, number one, this lady did sign the COVID relief package. Now, despite what Americans think about us needing that, we absolutely did not and should not have printed any of that money. Why? Because the majority of it was laundered through major banks like Jamie Dimon's banks into the hands of other people, other entities, globally, by the way. The majority of the money didn't even go to COVID. It went to other entities to bail out the corruption of our politicians and their major oligarchic, bureaucratic establishment. We had multiple states that were failing, multiple states that were going bankrupt. They're hiding their corruption. The majority of that money was laundered through the Federal Reserve. That's what people aren't understanding. And so while Elizabeth Warren is sitting up here with her political theater, and by the way, I'm not trying to spare Donald Trump here. Donald Trump signed that shit. Donald Trump signed this. Donald Trump bailed out the shale oil industry. Donald Trump bailed out a lot of the scumbags. That's a fact, whether it was in the name of COVID or not. Why is it that these people vote unanimously 96-0 when they were already aware that this stuff was going on 4 and 5 months prior? People need to understand this. So while this political theater is going on, people aren't really being aware of what actually happened, because the majority of the COVID money was laundered into other entities, not into our COVID relief. And that's a fact. And anybody who wishes to prove me wrong on that, please do. Please provide your evidence.
I don't know the number in front of me, but
Well, I actually have the number in front of me.
Upon
It's
request, we waived the fees.
$1.463 billion. That's nearly $1.5 billion that you collected from your customers. Now, do you know how much JP Morgan's profit would have been in 2020 if you had followed the recommendation of the regulators and waived overdraft fees to help struggling consumers? In other words, without that overdraft money, would your bank have been in financial trouble?
We waived the fees for customers upon request if they were under stress because of COVID.
You know, I appreciate that you wanted to this question. Do you know how much your profits would have been if you'd actually waived all the fees as the regulators recommended?
We waived the fees every time
the
a
answer
customer
is
asked us
your
to
profits would have been $27.6 billion. I did the math for you.
All right, so as you can see, the banter goes back and forth. Jamie Dimon is used to sparring with people. He's used to being called a crook, a criminal, a creep, all of which he most likely is. But the problem that people are failing to realize with theater like this is that even though Senator Warren appears to be knocking this guy off of his rocker a little bit, okay? She's disturbing him. She's trying to get under his skin and ruffle his feathers and get him to release serotonin and dopamine and become anxious and then maybe possibly misspeak or something like that. No. This is political theater to make you believe that this woman is actually doing what she says she is going to do. Whether it's a tax cut, the tax cuts are going to prey on ignorant consumers as well. We are debt consumer slaves. The people who are in control, including Elizabeth Warren, knows that human beings are most productive as consumers. Consumers. Extraction. You consume, they take that consumerism and they create leverage by banking fees, by way of legislative processes in our democratic society. There is no democracy here. And whether it's tax cuts that end up increasing the cost of living and people want to continue consuming the same thing, Elizabeth Warren knows that, Jamie Dimon knows that. So if you push a bank, let's say, to waive overdraft fees, well, how fair is it? Answer me this, Elizabeth Warren. Why is it not okay for a bank to charge overdraft fees for irresponsible consuming when it's okay for the United States government, because of people like you, who allow the Federal Reserve to inject money, massive amounts of money, into these banks via the repo market in order for a return on investment, when the banks deem themselves too risky to lend to one another? Please tell me why you're grilling this guy over the irresponsible spending of the average irrational, mind-controlled American consumer. Why are you going to push him for that when secretly, behind closed doors, and this is where the subversion occurs, and this is what people like Elizabeth Warren won't tell you, and it drives me nuts, and that is that the Federal Reserve is injecting hundreds of billions of dollars, sometimes daily, into banks who are too risky to lend to themselves. What do you think overdraft is? You've overconsumed. You've mismanaged. Now you're going to pay for that margin, right? You're going to pay for that margin trading, basically. You're borrowing. You have to pay it back. Not to mention, the Federal Reserve is injecting a crap load of money so that this can occur, so that these kinds of off-time transactions can occur. Overnight banking. So Elizabeth Warren won't tell you that. She won't tell you about they're not going to tell you about the lobbyists who continue throughout time to get to our politicians. The politicians may bring the argument or bring the legislation up to the floor, and it may be voted on and it may be shot down. Over time, with enough money, with enough momentum, enough influence, these things get passed, favoring those who were paid to implement such ideas, i.e., politicians. Politicians are getting away with insider trading. They are getting away with money laundering and information laundering, by which they can inject both into our bureaucracy to control our perception of reality. They have people who receive their information, pass it along to the media, and the media provides the cover stories by which these people can continue to launder themselves in leverage positions. And then they do their little political theater, just like Senator Warren does with Jamie Dimon here. And it may look like she's ruffling his feathers, and maybe he was just up for a good spar, but let me tell you, they are on the same team, and do not ever forget that.